Channel Fear Zone, where you find the most terrifying horror stories. My name is Antonio. Today, I'm going to share an experience that left me speechless. The story of a supernatural event I lived through in 2003 in the quiet town of Paranavaí, Brazil. That year changed my life forever. It was a night like any other, but what happened in the following weeks was something I will never forget. I'm going to tell you about an ancient curse involving a werewolf and a mysterious fog that haunted the residents of a secluded village deep in the forest. Get ready. This story will stir your deepest fears. I lived with my mother, Dona Marta, an elderly woman who was always reserved but knew a lot about the ancient legends of the region. She had a wisdom I never fully understood until that fateful year. One day, I heard news in the village that sent chills down my spine. A wanderer, who used to roam the area's roads, was found dead, brutally attacked, with deep marks as if something with sharp claws had torn him apart. Fear gripped all the residents, and of course, it gripped me too. No one knew what could have caused such brutality. What changed everything for me was a meeting with an elder from the village. He had tired eyes and a face that revealed the weight of the years. He told me a story passed down from his parents, something I would have preferred not to hear. He spoke of a thick fog with a metallic smell that appeared on certain nights, and whenever it showed up, it brought death. That very night, the old man confessed that he had felt the metallic scent in the air again, just like before other tragedies in the past. At that moment, I began to remember the stories my mother, Dona Marta, always told. She spoke of a strange fog, dense and smelling of iron, that hovered over the village over 60 years ago, before a series of mysterious deaths and attacks by wild creatures. No one knew what caused this fog, but its appearance was always linked to destruction. The memories of that time were still vivid in the minds of many residents, but few dared to speak of what really happened when the fog arrived. Dona Marta told me that when she was a teenager, she witnessed that same fog invade her family's house for several consecutive nights. The whole village was terrified because people said that something evil lurked within the fog. A demon, a creature with flaming eyes that emitted sounds of ferocious animals, which froze anyone in fear upon hearing it. For 7 consecutive nights, this fog brought death and dread until, mysteriously, it vanished. Ancient stories spoke of how the Quilombolas, descendants of slaves who lived nearby, managed somehow to banish the curse and save the village from a dark fate. One night, I heard my horse whinnying outside, and feeling restless, I decided to go to the yard to check what was frightening the animal. Looking out the window, I saw the fog creeping back into the yard, and I was petrified with fear. I tried to stop myself from going out, remembering my mother, Dona Marta's warnings that this was not an ordinary fog, but a dark omen, an evil lurking in the shadows. But the horse neighed with fear. I was worried about my animal and decided to take a chance. However, disregarding her words, I stepped outside and headed to the barn. When I reached the yard, I noticed that the fog was thick, almost tangible, and carried with it the metallic smell my mother had often mentioned. I took a deep breath and continued toward the barn, where I found my horse extremely agitated, whinnying as if terrified by something I could not yet see. I tried to calm the animal, but something in the air felt wrong. An invisible alarm spread throughout the environment. It was then that I began to hear sounds coming from the fog, noises that seemed to move around me as if something was lurking in the dense shadows. The sounds were guttural, a growl that resembled that of a rabid animal, something that made my heart race. Now, with all my senses heightened, I realized I was surrounded by something I couldn't see. Hearing the muffled sound of rapid footsteps approaching me, my instincts made me leap to the side, and a black shadow sped past me. It looked like an animal, but something was off. It was huge, grotesque, and terrifying, moving like a predatory beast. In the heat of the moment, I realized I was near the barn and ran towards a nearby tool, a pitchfork I used for my work. With my hands firmly gripping the tool, I felt the weight of the responsibility for my survival. The fog around me made everything confusing. I knew the creature was close, but visibility was almost zero. The noises ceased for a few moments, creating an unbearable tension in the air. Determined that the silence only heightened the danger, I decided to retreat to the house. The mist, now even thicker, turned my familiar path into a labyrinth of shadows. I quickened my pace, trying not to panic, until my eyes caught sight of a dark figure in the fog. Its eyes glowed like embers in the dark, and before I could react, the creature attacked me by surprise. In a quick reflex, I plunged the pitchfork into the creature, a precise strike to its belly. The metal penetrated deep, eliciting a scream of pain from the beast, but what followed froze me inside. The creature, even wounded, stood up on two legs, its deformed hands grasping the handle of the tool. Slowly, with supernatural strength, it began to pull the pitchfork from its flesh, roaring with pain and hatred. The heavy metallic air around seemed to vibrate with the sound, and I, overwhelmed by fear, realized that this fight was far from over. Right after the clash, I felt panic rise up my spine as I realized I might be facing a werewolf, as the beast appeared to be a twisted mix of a wolf and a human. Seizing the moment when the creature, clearly injured, was trying to free itself from the tool embedded in its body, I didn't think twice. I bolted down the fog-covered path, which seemed to swallow everything around me. Fear propelled me with every step, and I could hardly believe what I had just witnessed. My thoughts revolved around that enormous creature, which walked like a man but possessed the strength and instinct of a wild predator. I also noted the intelligence of the monster. It was using its hands to remove the pitchfork that had become tangled in its belly during the struggle. Even so, as I ran, the howls and growls still echoed in the forest behind me, as if the fog was conspiring with the creature, hiding it from human eyes. Arriving home, I was met by the anxious gaze of my mother, Dona Marta. She wept with relief upon seeing me safe and sound, but her face showed an ancient terror, as if the memories from 60 years ago were being revived before her eyes. I didn't want to believe what I had faced, but the reality was undeniable. The image of the creature, its frightening form, and its eyes shining in the midst of the fog were vivid details in my mind. I knew that it could be a werewolf, but I didn't dare share this conclusion with anyone. Instead, I kept the secret to myself, fearing my family's reaction. What troubled me most was the certainty that I had seriously injured the creature. If that was indeed a werewolf, someone from the village would appear with similar wounds the next day. The silence that settled in the early morning after the howls faded was almost deafening. My family remained on high alert, unable to sleep, while Dona Marta murmured softly, recalling the old stories her own mother used to tell her. "The fog brings death," she would say. And now, more than ever, I was convinced that this ancient curse had returned to haunt the village. The fog, always shrouded in mystery, seemed to herald something much worse. I reflected on the legends told by my mother. In the fog, creatures lurked, waiting for unsuspecting victims. With my heart still racing, I wondered if my attack had been enough to keep the creature away, at least until dawn. Now, doubt lingered in the air. Would the creature return? I knew I had wounded the beast, but I didn't know how severe the injury was. My mother, disturbed by the memories of the ancient curse, sensed that this would not be the last attack. As day began to break, I noticed the fog slowly dissipating, almost as if it had a life of its own. It receded in a strange manner, gradually disappearing until it was completely gone. That did not seem natural to my eyes. It was as if something or someone was controlling that phenomenon. When the sun was high in the sky, there were no more signs of the fog, and I decided it was time to check the stable and see how my horse was doing. Taking my shotgun, I went to the yard, where I soon noticed something disturbing. My pitchfork was lying on the ground, and there was a trail of blood nearby. At least now I had confirmation that the creature was real, no longer just a legend told by the elders. Despite the scare, I felt relieved to see that my horse was unharmed. However, my curiosity about what was really happening only grew. The fog, the bloodstains, and the mysterious event from the night before couldn't be mere coincidences. With this in mind, I decided to investigate further. I got in my car and headed to the village to talk to the residents, hoping to discover if anyone else had seen or heard anything, or perhaps even been attacked by the same creature I suspected was lurking around. As I drove down the dirt roads, I recalled something my mother, Dona Marta, had mentioned in a conversation. According to her, that fog had a mysterious connection to the ancient Quilambala villages in the region. It was said that these people, descendants of enslaved individuals, carried with them stories and ancient secrets about curses and entities that inhabited the woods. Intrigued, I decided to visit the Quilambala village to see if anything strange had happened there as well. Upon arriving at the village, I noticed unusual activity. There were many people gathered, and at the center of the commotion, a man lay on the ground. At first glance, he seemed to be severely injured or perhaps even dead. I immediately thought that the creature might have been responsible for this, But something caught my attention. Instead of panic, some of the men from the village were discussing the need to take the injured man to a specific place for treatment. Without any fuss, they placed him in a car and drove off toward the woods. Suspicious of what I saw, I decided to discreetly follow the group. I turned on my car and kept my distance so that no one would notice my presence. There was something wrong, something I still didn't understand, but my instinct told me that those men knew much more than they were letting on. The group of men stopped the car at a certain point in the forest. I parked my vehicle on the road and watched everything from afar, attentive to the movements of the Quilombolas. As they walked through the dense woods, the sound of dry leaves crunching underfoot blended with the rustling of the trees. The location, far from civilization, seemed untouched. When they reached the foot of a mountain, I got out of the car and entered the woods to see what they would do, keeping myself hidden, hardly believing what my eyes were witnessing. With skill, the men cleared away plants and branches that concealed the entrance to a cave, revealing a grotto that appeared forgotten for decades. The mouth of the cave opened up, dark and mysterious, like an ancient secret kept by the earth itself. I watched as the group entered the place, carrying the injured man. For long minutes, I remained there, motionless, waiting to understand what they would do. The anxiety grew in my chest, and I felt I was on the brink of discovering something disturbing. When the group finally emerged from the cave, something was different. The injured man, who had been carried with such care, was no longer with them. I frowned, trying to comprehend what had happened. The Quilombolas seemed to act as if nothing unusual had occurred. Calmly, they replaced the bushes and plants, sealing the cave's entrance as if sealing a deadly secret. As soon as they moved away and disappeared from sight, driven by curiosity, I approached the cave. The air was heavy, and the silence of the forest seemed to scream in my ears. With trembling hands, I brushed aside the branches covering the entrance. A damp smell and a chill emanated from within the grotto, as if something very old dwelled there. I hesitated, but curiosity overcame me. I stepped inside slowly, my footsteps echoing on the stone floor. As I entered, I saw a mist with a metallic scent inside the cave, but the mist was receding and almost disappearing. I found this strange and thought, could this be the fog of the werewolf, and does it come from this place? When my eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, I saw the body of a black man lying on the ground. Shock coursed through my body like an electric jolt. The man was motionless, pale, with an expression of pain frozen on his face. He looked dead, but something in his empty gaze suggested there was more in that cave than just the end of a life. I observed the man closely and noticed deep, multiple wounds on his abdomen, as if he had been brutally attacked. Confusion took over my thoughts. Who could have done this? And why had they left that man there, on the brink of death? With my heart racing and fear mounting, I began to retreat, slowly exiting the cave, trying to distance myself from that mysterious and dangerous situation. However, as I reached the exit, I was confronted by a group of men, all black, with serious expressions. They were armed and immediately pointed their shotguns at me, leaving me paralyzed. One of the men, with a firm yet calm voice, explained that while leaving, they had noticed my car parked on the nearby dirt road. That detail made them suspicious, prompting them to return. Now, here they were, at the entrance of the cave, ready to confront me. The eldest man in the group, standing with a respectful posture, told me not to be afraid, assuring me they would not harm me. "We just want to tell you the truth about this place," he said, his tone heavy with gravity. He added that the secret could not leave the boundaries of that area, so the outside world wouldn't be overtaken by panic and the truth about the werewolf wouldn't be revealed. Then, the wisest of the group, who turned out to be the shaman of the local Quilombola community, began to speak about what had happened there centuries ago. He revealed that the inhabitants of the village where I lived knew little, if anything, about what lay hidden in the forests around them. And the truth he kept was ancient, rooted in pain and injustice. More than 200 years ago, began the shaman, his eyes reflecting ancestral memories. During the times of slavery in Brazil, a cruel landowner ruled these lands. He was known for his brutality, not hesitating to torture his slaves, and had already taken the lives of many. One day, in a fit of rage, he began to whip an elderly slave woman, who was already on the brink of death from repeated beatings. However, fate took an unexpected turn. One of the slaves, filled with rage and desperation, challenged the landowner and killed him with his own hands in an attempt to save the woman's life. That act of rebellion had terrible consequences. The slave, fearing capture and execution, fled into the dense forests surrounding the region. News of the farmer's death spread quickly among the wealthy men of the area, who immediately began hiring slave hunters to capture him. They wanted blood, the shaman continued. The order was clear: kill the slave as soon as they found him. 4 days, the hunters patrolled the forest, determined to fulfill their mission. However, in his desperation, the slave found refuge in various hiding places until one day he discovered this cave. And there, in that dark and lonely place, he took shelter, staying hidden for several days while the forest around him was relentlessly searched by hunters thirsty for revenge. The shamans and sorcerers of the slave's tribes, witnessing the injustice against the fugitive, decided to intervene in his defense. They went to the cave where the slave was hiding and, joining forces in an ancient ritual, performed secret ceremonies to cast either a curse or perhaps salvation upon him. The spell granted him an almost invincible supernatural strength. The pursued slave would be able to attack those who tried to kill him, yet remain invisible to his pursuer's eyes through a thick mist. However, even the shamans themselves didn't fully understand how the curse would manifest. In the days that followed, something sinister began to happen. Hunters sent by the farmers to kill the fugitive started to disappear in the forest, and their bodies were found marked by brutal and violent attacks, with bites that tore them apart. Those who survived told terrifying stories. Their companions were killed by something they couldn't see, something moving within a dense mist, with a terrifying metallic smell. Soon, fear spread, and no one dared enter the woods in search of the slave anymore. However, the curse that initially seemed to protect him started spiraling out of control. The creature, which now moved within the mist, began to attack and kill innocent people indiscriminately. Over time, even the slaves, upon learning of the legend of the cave, decided to capture the cursed man, who transformed into a werewolf during the mist. They killed him and buried his body inside the very cave where the shamans had cast the curse. Thus, the magical seal that bound the curse was contained but never fully undone. According to ancient legends from African shamans, every 60 years, the seal weakens, and a descendant of the cursed slave assumes the curse, transforming once again into a werewolf. The metallic mist returns, hiding the creature as it attacks. The sorcerer revealed to me that the only way to renew the seal would be through the death of the newly cursed man and his subsequent burial in the cave. Upon looking inside the cave, I saw 4 human skeletons on the ground. The shaman explained that those were the bodies of other men who, over the centuries, had carried the werewolf's curse and were killed by someone who knew the cave's secret, temporarily interrupting the cycle of the curse. Unfortunately, he said no one knows how to completely break this magic, only control it for a certain time. I noticed that the little fog in the cave had completely disappeared. The shaman said that this was the sign they had managed to stop the curse. After that conversation, I felt an unbearable weight on my shoulders. I never imagined that the monster I had faced that terrible night was, in fact, a human being, a Quilambala cursed by the ancient spell. The wounds on the man's stomach were identical to the ones I had left on the creature with the pitchfork. That scene replayed in my mind like a movie. The metallic smell in the air, the dense fog that made it hard to see, and the terrifying sound of howls echoing through the farm. Everything felt like a nightmare, but the reality was even crueler. I had taken a human life, even if cursed. Fearing justice, legal consequences, and the unrelenting judgment of the police, I knew the only way out was silence. I agreed with the village elder to keep the secret of that terrible curse buried. I didn't want the world to know what I had done, nor the supernatural forces that roamed the farm. In the days that followed, the mysterious fog disappeared as quickly as it had arrived, and there were no more reports of werewolf sightings. But in the Quilambala village, the story of that horrible night spread. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one dared speak openly about it. Even with the apparent end of the curse, I never found peace. Every night, I tossed and turned in bed, wondering if the fog would return, if the werewolf would come back to haunt me. I knew that despite the silence, the curse never completely disappeared. The winds blowing through the trees around my house seemed to whisper ancient secrets, and the shadows danced strangely on full moon nights. To this day, I fear the return of the creature, and every sound in the middle of the night makes me think that the werewolf in the mist might be lurking, waiting for the right moment to take revenge. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.